And the dredging industry, the Dutch part, has been instrumental in developing the building with nature concept in the Netherlands, and today it's called EcoShape. So the industry felt very strongly that more innovation was needed to cope with all the problems of sea level rise, of coastal erosion. So that's a little bit the background. But today we'll talk about very more practical items, and we'll touch about some of these aspects, and we can always discuss it later informally. So, subject is back to nature. ThinkNature projects. How can we make it happen? How can we get them realized? And we should realize that nature-based solutions are also projects like any other that require management. And project management is a discipline, a structure, and it requires a systematic approach. Now, of course, nature-based solutions can be any kind of solution, can be very small scale, and can be very large scale. So the methodology that I'm suggesting is a general approach, generic. Of course, if you have simple projects, you don't have to do everything that I'll be talking about. And if you have complex projects, it may not be enough, but let's look at the structure. And nature-based solutions obviously are based on natural behavior, on ecosystems behavior, and that implies uncertainty. We do not always know what's going to happen and how systems develop. So why are nature-based solutions more complex than traditional ones? It's dynamic. Nature-based projects built on dynamic ecosystems, functions. There are multiple stakeholders. You cannot just start something, you need to get everybody on board. And that's one of the first steps in the organization. In many cases there are several approaches possible, and in the initial stage, comparison of different approaches needs to be done to find the optimal. Proper nature-based solutions is not only solving a particular problem, but in general there are more benefits, and you may have to optimize for those benefits. So there's a need for a methodology to account for that, and in the end, because systems are dynamic and not 100% certain to predict, you may have to adapt the system and the solution to the reality, to what happened. That's what's called adaptive management. So in a traditional project, you start from the beginning, you analyze the requirements and the design objectives, and then you go through the different steps: implementation, testing, installation, and then operation of the system. And it's, in summary, design, build, operate. That's a traditional project. As I mentioned, the nature-based projects are working with ecosystems, and it's often a feedback approach that you need to take. So the adaptive management, and we'll talk about some example at the end. So what I'm suggesting to structure the approach is 10 steps. So we'll talk about the 10 steps. And cover it in 2 parts. The first 5 steps are outlining the problem, involving the stakeholders, scoping analysis, or exactly how we can go about it, studying alternatives, and then selecting the preferred design. And at that point in time, you would have to make a choice. So we'll talk about each step a little more in detail. Why do we have to put the issue in context? Why do we have to define the problem? Well, nature-based solution, as the word says, it's a solution to a particular problem that we're addressing in the first place. And the problems are known. You've probably heard about it yesterday. There's droughts, there's additional rain, pluvial flooding, there's flooding in the cities, there's flooding of the rivers, there's sea level rise predicted, temperature rise problems leading to different climates and problems in the urban climate, and related to our society, there are problems of pollution, loss of biodiversity. So that's the inventory that you've heard about, I'm sure. And we also have to look at the scale of the intervention. And we suggest that that it's practical to talk about 6 different scales. At the level of the building, an urban sector, what we call line infrastructure, or connecting parts of a city or parts of a landscape issues, river issues, and coastal flooding, coastline erosion. So that's, with these problems, list of problems and the list of the scale, we can already focus on the type of issue that we have to address. So, in order to make it practical, I'll use a theoretical example to illustrate what can be done and what should be done. There's a city that had an industrial past, but the factory has disappeared. So there's an empty site, a brownfield site, but rather near the center of the city. So the town council would like to develop that in a pleasant way, and not to build houses on that, but to use it in some other way as a public space. But there are some practical issues that they would like to address. That's flooding issues from rain. There's a need for more green spaces. There's a need for room. There's a need for more recreation space. So those are the general goals that the town council has in mind. But they also they have limited budget, as often is the case. So they would like to involve the citizens and see if they can reach their goals in a simpler manner and possibly cheaper manner. So the stakeholders need to be involved in a nature-based project, and preferably the range of stakeholders should be as wide as possible. It should cover the experience, the acceptance, and also the performance of the project. And stakeholders should then be selected according to the nature of the project. If you want to build a park, you need other people than if you need to protect the coast, or if you have flooding problems from the river. So that's fairly obvious. Green roofs are local examples and can be done in a simple manner, but the erosion problems are more complex. So, in general, there should be clear rules how to go about the project. And in our example, the town council announces the project and invites citizens, volunteers. And they do get responses from professionals that are retired and would like to use their experience. And in fact, they were lucky. They had technical, financial, and project managers as volunteers, but also parents, local citizens and green NGOs, they were all volunteered to participate in this planning exercise to develop the brownfield. So the council said, okay, we'll help you. We provide some support, planning, some our expertise in construction. We provide financial help. We'll help you with the planning permits, but please provide us some a project that we can work on and that you like. And in this case, it needs a rigid approach. If you want to develop a large site, you need to know what you're doing. So the structure that was chosen is a temporary association with an executive committee, general assembly, and the executive is directed by the citizens, but the council, the town council, supports it. So that provides a structure, but we still have no project. In that context, in general, you need scoping analysis. You need to define the goals, then talk with the stakeholders how to broaden the goals, how to satisfy as many objectives as you could, but also defining the constraints. What is the budget, who finances it, who provides the finance, the resources, the time frame, all that needs to be defined at this point in time. And then do we have enough knowledge available, or do we have to ask for studies for theoretical support? And then, what's very important, we also at this point have to define the performance criteria or the indicators, and that will be the next subject. So I'll not go into detail on that, but that's an important step in the process. So in our example, then the goals are to develop a brownfield, fairly large site, 10 hectares, next to a railway, but open to the general public. And the constraints set by the town council, the green cover should be at least 25%. Water storage and retention capability should be provided and maximized if possible. And there's emphasis on biodiversity, but there's also a need for playground, and that has to be developed together. And as I said, the town council provides support, financing, technical support, construction support, and they're very eager to that the project becomes a success. They define a schedule, 1 year for the development and the design, and 1 year for the implementation. So the different parties that have been invited come together, and they do some brainstorming. They come up with a lot of ideas. Of course, a park, a pond, garden for the blind, footpath, and you can imagine what it is. Some people would like a swimming pool, others prefer tennis courts, a third party says, but don't forget the parking space. So there's a long list of items that everybody would like, that some would like, but not all can be realized. So the evaluation criteria at this point in time would be need to be defined. So the key performance indicators need to be defined for the project, and those should be qualitative or quantitative. And there's a need to emphasize the nature-based performance, so carbon retention, temperature reduction, water storage, and some idea about the future is also useful at this point in time. How can maintenance be done? Are there additional costs over the life cycle? So in our example, let's become practical. The criteria that are set is a percent of green cover realized after 1 year, and how it could be after 5 years. Water retention capacity is defined as necessary. And on biodiversity, some parameters are suggested. And then the benefits, an initial inventory of benefits is defined at this point in time, but we still don't have the final project to realize. So the alternatives are put together, a set of alternative concepts in our example, but also in most other cases, and that depends on the size of the project. For smaller projects, the whole team is involved. For larger projects like coastal erosion, you need experts. You need to develop theoretical models before the project takes shape. So the details depend on the complexity of the project. That's fairly obvious, but you should keep that in mind. And in our example, it results in 3 different suggestions, proposals. It's a green scenario with emphasis on renaturing and biodiversity, lots of greens. Second scenario that's developed is a blue scenario with maximizing the water retention capability, lakes and swales in the parkland. And the third scenario puts attention on the use to the public, so the swimming pool, the gardens, possibly the tennis court, the picnic places. So we have three scenarios, and at some point in time we will have to select between those. So we start with a preliminary assessment listing the benefits and the ecosystem services expected in each case, and also the possible disadvantages. At that point in time, we will need to make a comparative analysis between the 3 scenarios in our case, and provide an additional an initial estimate of the cost. Sometimes cost data are available, but in most cases you need to develop it up front. And in our case, our example, let's be practical on so the methodology that I suggest is a multi-criteria analysis to compare the different scenarios. It doesn't have to be quantitative at this point in time. It can be a qualitative comparison, and you can usually draw the right conclusion on basis of that. So it's an example, so it's easy. You can put in the pluses and the minuses as you like, but I put them like this: in the green scenario, the blue scenario, and the purple. For the green cover, it's obviously most interesting for the green scenario. For the water management, it's the blue scenario. The biodiversity, it's different for the 2, but for the green and the blue, it's both interesting. For the facilities for the general public, the playground facilities, that's maximized in the purple scenario, but not so much in the green and the blue. Is it nature-based? That was a criterion from the town council, and in fact the purple scenario is not nature-based, so that's a big handicap. But for the green and the blue, it's almost equal, but it's different, but the quality is almost equal. And the cost plays a role, and in the approach, the green scenario is somewhat more cost-effective, is cheaper than the blue. So on that basis, we score the green scenario as the most interesting. The blue is almost as nice, the second, and the purple does not meet the criteria that have been set. So at this point in time, we need to take a decision which scenario is going to work. It's an obvious, it's a decision point. And if none of the scenarios is adequate, then we have to go back and change either the the scenario itself or the performance criteria. There's feedback already at this point in time. But now we go to the second part, the second, the steps 6 to 10. That's how we have to realize it. And the first step is the detailed design. We have now a scenario, an approach, but it still needs a lot of detail how to implement. And that design needs to be carried out usually by, in all cases, by experts, but it depends, of course, on the size of the projects, how much expertise is involved. You need to specify the design at this point in time more completely. It has to be translated into drawings, bills of material, etc. Everything you need to know to do for a normal project, for a traditional project. But there's emphasis on the nature-based aspects, or the different benefits and the different ecosystem functions. So in our example, the town council provides the support, and the design is carried out by a team of landscape architects and engineers, financed by the town council. So they have regular interaction with the team of the stakeholders to realize what the people want, what the stakeholders have in mind. It's financed by the town council, and the cost estimates are prepared. But there were limits on the financing, and there were limits on the implementation time. So, just to see, to show that this is not a simple exercise. This could be the result of such a planning, an improvement of a brownfield. And in fact, this is an example from a real case, but the rest of the example is invented. Now, we are not ready yet. We have a design, but it has to be assessed in more detail for 2 reasons. We need to see what the environmental impact is, if it's positive or negative, and that's important for getting a permit. And we have to look at the cost, because the project needs to be financed as well. So, in terms of detailed assessment, there are two methodologies that may have to be followed. And on the left side you see environmental impact analysis, and that's a formal analysis which is required in any case in Europe for large infrastructure projects. And the connotation is that large infrastructure projects have a lot of negative, possibly negative effects, and in an environmental impact assessment that those negative aspects have to be developed. Now, my suggestion is that for a proper nature-based project, the impact is usually not negative but positive. But if it's a large-scale project, like the one I suggested on coastal erosion, you still need to develop an environmental impact assessment, and that's a formal procedure according to a European directive. We'll not go into the detail on that. But the second methodology is more generic. It's a cost-benefit assessment. We need to pay for the project, and what do we get for it? That's basically the question. And what we get for it are a number of benefits. So benefits need to be made explicit and need to be quantified to a certain extent. And benefits can also be called, in most cases, ecosystem services. And it's important to distinguish between the environmental side, the social aspects, and the economic aspects. And my suggestion is that for economic aspects, it's possible to apply a monetary value. But if you talk about social and environmental benefits, it's very difficult to put a monetary value on that. And usually it's better to, in in my view, to use qualitative assessment there. So the cost benefit has to be applied for the project, but then it has to be put in context. In many cases, context is that if we would do nothing at all, what would happen? And why is this project of advantage? If we do nothing, are there negative costs? Is there damage that we avoid? And it's a major question for large projects. So let's take the example of a river. Let's take the River Seine up front of upstream of Paris. In Paris, we've seen several years where the flood level in the city was very high and almost critical. So if you can develop a large-scale project upstream of the Seine River to keep more water, flooding water in the floodplains and in marshes up front, the risk of flooding of the city of Paris would reduce, and that has a large economic value, because there are insurers that would have to pay for damage of flooding, and they would be very happy if the risk of flooding in Paris is reduced. And you can quantify that certainly in the economic and monetary terms. So the suggestion is that avoided damage cost can often be a large element in nature-based projects, should not be forgotten. So in our case, I suggest, it's an example again, we could, for example, compare the cost and the benefits for three alternatives for the project itself. The first column for a traditional grey alternative. And the third case for doing nothing. Are the processes are not developed in any detail, but I suggest that investment cost is the first item. The balance of life cycle is the second item, and that involves maintenance and estimated repair and evolution of the project over time. And the third item, estimated damage cost. Now, for the example, a nature-based project and the grey alternatives of developing the brownfield do not have negative costs, but doing nothing has certainly a cost for the community. And in terms of benefits, economic benefit should be quantified during the life cycle, not only initially upfront, but during the life cycle, and that's not obvious. That means that you have an idea of how the system develops. The avoided damage cost or the insurance cost come into play again, and of course you have to be careful that you don't count it double. It cannot be counted as a benefit and as a cost. But I suggest here that the avoided damage costs are positive, need to be on the side of the benefits. And then there are social benefits and environmental benefits. And I said before, if you can avoid it, they should not be expressed in monetary terms, but they should be expressed in qualitative terms. So for the example for the brownfield that we are developing, the green project scored much better than the purple case, as we've seen. The example, the public authority pushes the project and provides the bulk of the finance, because we need to finance it. And the project can be justified by assessing the green versus the purple case. So more in detail, the benefits for the nature-based solutions are for the public use, the economic benefits and the ecosystem services. And for the green project, I've listed. It's accessible. The brownfield, the park is accessible to the general public. It's good for public health. It's good for the urban climate. It helps in carbon retention. It stimulates biodiversity, and it plays a role in water regulation. And it meets the budget that was set by the town council. And the purple project is diverse. It's open to the public but restricted. Let's take an extreme example. If you build tennis courts on a site like that, it's not very helpful because the number of people that can benefit from it is limited, and it's not a green solution at all. So public facilities may be useful, but it's not necessarily green. And the purple solution is not very helpful for the urban climate and exceeds the budget. So again, the example is subject to so it is subjective because I put the pluses and the minuses. But now we really have to look at the financing. In this case, financing for the project is relatively easy because the town council provided the finance. But in many cases, there are other problems. There may be a need for private finance, or the project may be totally private, and then for a private project, you really need to show that the investment pays back. So public projects need public finance, that's relatively straightforward. Private projects need private finance, and that's more difficult, or a mixture, maybe subsidized to some extent. But the projects that are financed privately need really to demonstrate that the benefits exceed the cost. So for private finance, there are some other constraints. Even if you can demonstrate that the benefits exceed the cost, you have to look at the investor who pays for it and who benefits from this project. And there may be cases that the benefits are not interesting for the investor, but only for the general public. So there may be a conflict, and that's important in the private private financing. So that is a big question for the nature-based solutions of a certain scale. Now we still have to make the project work, so we have to build it, to implement it. We will not talk about that for a long time. I show a green roof on the left-hand side, and I show the relatively well-known example of the sand motor in the Netherlands, where a large amount of sand has been deposited in front of the coast, and the idea is that the currents bring it up, distribute the sand along the coast so that the sandy coast is protected for many years to come. The traditional solution was to provide sand almost every year at specific locations, and that became very costly. So the idea is, if we put a lot of sand on one place, it may get distributed in a natural manner. That's the sand motor case, which is fairly known in the literature, and it was the initiative of the dredging industry, so I'm fairly proud of it. Now, if the project is realized, we have to monitor what's going on. We started by saying nature-based project is a dynamic project. It's an ecosystem that function and cannot necessarily be predicted exactly how developments go. So you need to look at the evolution of the project, and in particular against the performance criteria. And that needs to be continued over the life cycle, and therefore baseline data are important, and the monitoring should be as simple as possible and as robust as possible. If you have to provide very expensive and very frequent monitoring methods, then it may affect the cost of the project. For small projects, periodic field studies are okay, and for large infrastructure projects, remote sensing is probably necessary. So I started off by saying these projects may need to be adapted over time, because there's uncertainty with the functioning of ecosystems. The monitoring provides the data to do that, and adaptive management is a concept, and learning by doing that provides a framework for decision making on the future. And the system may have to be adapted to meet the performance expectations. There are cases that you expected something to happen, and it's not happening as you predicted. And those cases are really frequent in flooding of river-based management and coastal flooding. Now, this is just a general illustration of adaptive management, which is similar to what I described now. There's nothing special about the figure. It's just to show that adaptive management is a form of feedback. You still need. We are dealing with living systems, and we have to know what we're doing. We may have to adapt our approach to the systems. So let's take a practical example of what could happen if we have a constructed wetland constructed for water purification. Could be for agricultural runoff. It could be for as a last step of sewage treatment. So for that type of constructed wetland, there are clearly performance criteria that have been set up front. How much phosphor can remain in the water, how much nitrogen needs to be removed, are there organic contaminants that are dangerous and that remain in the water. And those elements can be influenced by the type of plants that you put in a constructed wetland. So if the criteria are not met, adaptive management, if the criteria are not met, you may have to adapt the type of flora that you put in the constructed wetland. That's an example of what could happen, and there are many more examples for other types of systems. So that's how we get to the end. The 10 steps that I ran through quickly, they may have there are 3 possibilities that you need for feedback. The first possibility was from the decision point to step 4. That was adapt the scenario if it's not meeting your initial criteria. The feedback from 10 to 6 is if the detailed design does not work exactly as you would like, then you may have to adjust the detailed design. And the large arrow 10 going back to step 3, that would be a situation that your system doesn't work at all as you expect, and that you would have to develop a new scenario. And I hope that that's not going to happen in practice, but those are the three steps that may occur. So that's a summary of a practical approach and of the items that you have to keep in mind in dealing with nature-based projects in practice. Thank you. Questions? Yes? Remarks? Go ahead. The lady in the back there.
Okay. Well, you can go first.
Oke, aku
question was going to be that in your implementation description, you first said that the design should be done by a group of experts, which makes all the sense of the world. But you know there are all these initiatives to do co-development of the design with the stakeholders or with the citizens and so on. So at some point, which should be the balance? Because always the technicians are the ones that have the technical knowledge. So how do you see this co-development? I mean, what can the stakeholders, citizens and so on, contribute to the design and make it more safe?
Well, the stakeholders define the objectives, and they should be the counterpart of the experts, and there should be a very regular interface. Now, and I said it depends on the size of the project. If you have a green roof, then it's the local community that says we like this and we like that, and then you need somebody to decide how much soil you need on the roof and how strong the roof has to be. So that's fairly simple. And then the center of gravity is with the local community. And but the other extreme is the coastal protection, where you need the experts, and there's very limited input of stakeholders. And it's a whole range of possibilities. Yes, Suzanne.
You have this example, was it imaginary or a real example? Where people were thinking of where you have these three alternative scenarios, green, blue and purple. Was it an imaginary one?
It's my invention, but it's based. It's inspired by a real case, but okay. In reality it went more structured. So there were not the three different. But in reality the brainstorming took place, but then it was not developed into the three scenarios. But the brainstorming, and that's happened. If that happens in general, if you get stakeholders, then the one likes to. Even for a local garden, one wants to grow fruit, and the other one wants to grow flowers, and the third one wants to create a pond.
The reason I asked was that I have been recently participating in a couple of planning processes, where one very small, like very local green roof, and another bigger one. And in both cases, it actually happens that there's kind of like only one scenario that tries to combine all the goals into one. Yeah. And after a little bit of juggling around with your little gray cells, it's actually possible to put almost everything together, even though at the beginning it may seem a bit difficult. So it looks like in those cases we have all the 1, 2, and 3 like put in one. So that's why I wanted to ask about, sometimes it can happen that, and it's also related to the detailed planning phase, because in the detailed planning phase you can actually solve issues in a way that you can get more on one side. Do you agree about that?
Yeah, I agree. It's to structure the different the services that could be provided and the benefits, they are multiple and they have to be optimized. I agree with that. Let's see. And congratulations with if you can avoid the alternatives, then it's easier. But for private projects, in general, you need to be to compare with an alternative. But if there are private financing items involved, then the alternative needs to be considered just to show how good it is. Yes, go ahead.
Question. How can we ensure that public authorities fosters or promote these green goals or these key performance indicator related to environmental performances in planning processes? Do we need to write down some new legal requirements for project approval, or because if not, administrator maybe can act as traditional ways?
Well, I think that's the reason for us being together here and for the ThinkNature projects. The suggestion by the European Commission is that this is a subject that should be disseminated, or the concept should be disseminated as widely as possible so that people are aware of it. So the town council that I referred to was very visionary. They said, well, we have limited resources, we can't do it ourselves, let's get the citizen involved, and it worked very well. But there are also town councils that feel that they know best. So that's the idea. Get rid of the people that think they know best and vote for somebody else. Yes, Erik?
Yes, talking about the cost-benefit assessment, and you mentioned that it's okay to put a monetary value for economic benefits, but it's questionable for social and environmental benefits.
Erik, can you please repeat it, because I'm not sure everybody heard it.
Yeah. So the question is on the cost-benefit assessment. I made the point that the economic benefit can be quantified in monetary terms, but that I have doubts about the monetary value of social and environmental benefits. And I said it on purpose because it's my conviction, but in practice many people try to put monetary value on social and environmental benefits with all kinds of techniques, and it's possible, but you have to realize that the monetary value of the environmental benefits is a shadow value. It's not a real value. It's something perceived, and certainly the monetary value of the social benefit you can express it in I don't know, the number of prisoners avoided because the climate is the social climate is better, or the number of children that are less unhappy, or but it becomes very subjective. And my conviction is that that with qualitative assessment of non-economic benefits, you can cover the whole range that you need. But there's a very theoretical discussion going on that question. What is value and what can be monetized? So my answer is my answer, but it's not necessarily the answer of everybody. Suzanne, once again.
Yeah, if nobody else is bringing up anything, I would like to challenge one thing. You said very black and white fact that public projects need public finance and private projects need private funding. But then on the other hand, we do have examples where, for example, the municipality supports private projects in order to advance environmentally friendly solutions. So they kind of take some sort of a carrot to
subsidize.
Make subsidize. Or even they only give the building permission provided the private investor invests in the public amenity, like accessible roof garden on top of a commercial building, for example, publicly open. So it's like you can look for co-benefits or co-investing.
Yeah, there's mixed or hybrid solutions to that. But my approach was to provide the extremes. I think we have to turn to Denia, otherwise the time is running out.